Well, welcome back to GTN's Coach's Corner. You've got two of us this week, and we've got 5 topics covering. The first one is, why is my power lower when I'm riding on the clip-on aero bars?
Yeah, should you carry spares in a sprint distance triathlon?
Another one on clip-on aero bars, should I actually keep them on if I'm doing a hilly triathlon?
And should you add, and how often should you add, weights into your triathlon training?
The final question, should I prioritise sleep or fueling ahead of an early start of a triathlon?
Yeah, great questions, and you can have your questions answered by using the hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. Pop that under this video or any other video, and we will try and answer them in the near future. But starting with this question from Pete Richards, in which he asks, I've got clip-on tri-bars on my bike. I've got my position set up nicely, but I find that I cannot put out the same power as when I'm on the drops. Is this expected, or is there anything I can do? What do you think of this one?
Well, I think to start with, it depends on how much you're losing before you get too worried about it, because you will be gaining when you're in the more aero position. So first things, don't panic about it, but it's also not that abnormal, especially to start with. I know you say you've got a good position. Obviously, we can't see that, so we don't know what a good position means, but it's not just about looking good. It's about actually being able to be strong enough and hold that position as well.
Yeah, there is absolutely a bit of a trade-off sometimes going to that sort of more aggressive position, as Heather says, and you will benefit from the aerodynamics of that more aggressive and aero position. It will take a bit of adaptation, but I know you say you have got a good position. Hopefully, you are adding clip-on aero bars clearly onto a road bike. Yeah. So hopefully with that position, you've taken that into account. A road bike is designed for riding on the hoods or in the drops. Putting on the aero bars is very, very different, which is why a triathlon bike has a very different geometry. So normally what we find is if you're putting clip-on aero bars onto a road bike, you do end up putting your saddle much further forward, and with that also your saddle or your seat post up to accommodate that as well, and that therefore just puts you a little bit further forward onto those clip-on aero bars and should allow you to put out more power. If you don't do that, you are going to struggle to put out power. Your hip angle is going to be much, much tighter, and yeah, you do often find people can't put out the power as a result when they put on clip-on aero bars onto a standard road bike.
Yeah, also on top of that, once you have got that position dialed in, obviously you're limited, but there's still, you can work on doing your core and also just practicing being in that position, so that it's a matter which is quite hard to measure, but how comfortable and confident you are in that, because even though you think you're trying really hard, if you're not quite relaxed into the position or you're sort of tensing and using energy elsewhere, that's energy all used up. So.
As a great example, actually, Belinda, who James kindly built her bike up for her here on GTN, she actually struggled when she first started riding that bike and saw a massive drop off in power, and that slowly came back over the coming weeks. So yeah, that was quite a nice example we found. Right, next one from Olivia Hull. Should you carry spares for a sprint triathlon? I would say always carry spares. However, I am guilty of not carrying spares.
Okay, that's fair enough. Do as we say, not as we say.
I actually, it really depends on the race. Often for a sprint distance, or even sometimes even an Olympic distance, you are never getting too far away from the start or the finish. And it's quite a short race. My take on it is, for that shorter distance race, if I get a puncture, it's kind of race over really. But it really depends on why you're doing it. If you just want to finish it, then absolutely take spares because you want to make sure you get around and finish. But for me, if I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on the side of the road, I've probably lost so many places, and that is sort of what I'm doing the event for, because I like to race. And equally, you know you're not getting too far away from the start, so you can probably push the bike back if, worst case.
Yeah, I guess, it still could still be, in theory, 20k away if you're doing an Olympic distance.
Yeah, I know.
And I guess it depends on the size of the event and what help there is. But I would still say, question, what are you trying to, why do you not want to carry spares? Because you can tape an inner under your saddle, you could put them pretty tidily just to be able to change a puncture and refill the one. And if it's a really cold, wet day and you've got to wait an hour for pickup, I would probably rather struggle and change my power and actually get home and then maybe still do the run to warm up. So I guess think about your priorities.
You are absolutely right, and I'm probably thinking back, I used to race a lot of
triathlon
races which were short sort of loops, and so it wasn't such a big issue.
Well, actually, this next question is also from Olivia Hull. So here we go again. This one is, this is obviously the race then. I will race a sprint distance triathlon in 2 weeks. The bike course is pretty hilly, 500 meters of elevation. I'm asking myself if I should use my clip-on aero bars. Is the weight saved by taking them off going to match the Aero penalty? What should I do?
I mean, that is actually quite a lot of elevation for the relative to the distance of the race. Yeah. However, there are very few examples where I would say get rid of the aero bars. You will still benefit from the aero bars at some points, and a set of clip-on aero bars are going to add very little weight really overall to the bike. So whilst yes, you will be carrying that extra weight up the hill and not be using them, there will be sections of the course where I would imagine you'd benefit massively from them, and they'll probably far outweigh any slight amount of time that you've lost in carrying that extra weight up a hill. Go recce the course though, if you can, because that is probably the best thing to do, and just sort of see whether there are points where you will actually use the aero bars. If it's so technical and so hilly and you're descending the rest of the time, then maybe you don't need them at all. Yeah,
it's hard to say exactly for that situation, but on the whole, they're not going to slow you down very much, and they've got probably more potential to speed you up.
I mean, again, using an example, the Ironman World Championships coming up in Nice, there's a lot of talk about whether you should use a road bike with perhaps clip-ons on or a tri-bike, and actually, a lot of people are saying, well, you are going to use the aero bars quite a lot. So it is quite close, and we have done a video on GTN about that specific course, but it does seem like the triathlon bike does still trump it, so despite being a mountainous course.
Oh, it's going to be an interesting one, isn't it? Anyway, we digress slightly. So next question from David Biggins says, hi, GTN Coaches Corner. I'm fairly new to triathlons. I've done one super sprint and one Olympic this year. Loving the challenge so far, but there's one thing that puzzles me about training. How often should I add in weights, and where should I fit them into my training program? For example, if I train for 6 days, so 2 swims, 2 bikes, 2 runs, which days am I safest to add a little bit of weights? It's kind of quite a complex question. It's a hard one to answer briefly, isn't it?
I guess the first to say is congratulations for actually considering this, because a lot of people do forget about this or ignore conditioning or weight training, and that's probably my next thing as well, actually. Don't think it necessarily about picking up and lifting weights. This is more about conditioning. We like to sort of talk about conditioning for triathlon. So you're conditioning yourself for the demands of swim, bike, run, and trying to run off the bike and whatnot. So think of it more like that, and it's functional sort of strength and conditioning for the demands.
Yeah, so it's to complement that swim, bike and run. So it's look at the areas that you might see the weakness rather than doing a generic program. I think it's what Mark's trying to say is...
in a roundabout way. You explain that much better than I did.
So I mean, if for example you know that you're struggling to hold your bike position for a long time, you'll need to do some work on your core, and same with running. Or if you're finding that your running isn't that economic, you might want to do a bit more single leg stuff to help with the balance there. So first of all, try and identify where you think your weaknesses might be, and then add that into your exercises. But also if you are going to say want to be doing some squats or something like that to help with your strength, that's great. But think about where you're putting it in with your training, because you ultimately, if you are doing those just 2 of each sport, you want to make sure those sessions count. And it's okay to be doing some sessions tired, but when you've got a really key session, you want to nail that. You want to run at the pace or cycle at the pace so that your body is getting used to going at that pace rather than doing everything fatigued. And then flip it the other way. If you're doing strength conditioning stuff, you want to make sure you're doing that well, especially if you're doing activation work or single leg stuff. You can't do that badly. You've got to come relatively fresh, but also mentally fresh so that you can do it properly to benefit. Otherwise, I'd say don't do it.
It's a really tricky one to get the balance right. And what I have done, and I know this is easier said than done, but what I have done in the past is alternate days, week on week. So as you say, 1 week might be post a run workout that I've done earlier in the day. So therefore, unfortunately, my legs might be tired, but it means that I've got that good quality run session. And then the next week, it's the other way around. I'm actually doing it perhaps a day or so before that run workout. Means I'm fresh for the gym session, but unfortunately it does mean I'm going to carry some fatigue into that run session as a quick example. But it does take a bit of work and trying to find that balance.
Another one is, again, like obviously if you're just doing swim on one day, then you could concentrate on legs in the gym and it won't really affect your swimming. So without seeing your program, we can't give you, hopefully that's giving you the tools to work out how to fit it in.
Yeah, good stuff. And a final question here, and this is from Jamie Furman, who is a regular on our GTN Coaches Corner. What are your thoughts on eating before a super early race? I've heard the 2 to 3 hour rule of thumb, but some of the full distance triathlons start at 4:30 with transition opening at 3 a.m. and I don't want to squeeze a meal in at the expense of sleep, especially that early. Appreciate your advice. I mean, I totally get you here. I mean, if you're having to sort of get to transition at 3 a.m, I mean, you're not obviously going to get up at midnight. I mean, you just wouldn't bother sleeping at that point, would you? But eating is incredibly important before the race. However, at that sort of time in the morning, you're probably going to struggle to eat a lot, and the nerves are going to be high anyway, and then it's not going to have been that long since you last ate. My take on this is, don't worry quite as much about the actual morning. It's more about the day or so leading into that. You clearly are going to struggle to eat much at that time in the morning, but thinking more about what you've eaten in the 24 or 48 hours before. You should be sort of just upping the carb intake slightly. And it doesn't mean just forcing food down you, but just extra snacks or replacing snacks with slightly more carb heavy substitutes. And then also the meal the night before, I would have that quite early on, try and have an early dinner, but a good high dose of carbohydrates in that meal. Get a good early night's sleep, go to bed, small breakfast, and you're probably going to want to, at 3 a.m, you're not going to want to wake up much more before that, are you?
Oh, that's incredibly early, isn't it?
Yeah, and then get yourself down there in plenty of time to get ready, have a gel and anything else you maybe need, small snacks to get you ready for a race. So anything you would change there?
I would maybe say, because the eating early is a really good idea the night before, but then actually if you're not going to bed for another 3 or 4 hours after, have another snack, because you can still top up, and that will then help close that gap from when you last ate to when you eat in the morning. And experiment in training with snacks that you can tolerate not so long, not the 3 hours before. So if you've got some early morning training or some sort of training where you don't need to have a massive breakfast, then whether that's having some homemade rice cakes or whether it's having some sort of bar or a gel or anything like that, practice taking that at the similar time to what you'll be getting up to when your race starts. So you just know that what you can tolerate as well. I feel your pain. I'm definitely one for the pressing snooze, but then I can also force food down and when I wake up. So experimentation is probably the best bet for this one.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks ever so much for all your questions. Again, keep them coming in using that hashtag GTN Coaches Corner, and we'll see you next time.